There we go. There we go. Hello, everyone. That's me down in the bottom right. All right.
Excellent. Good to see you there, Paul.
What it saves people having to look at two different screens. So yeah, this session is about building the roadmap. It's going to be very different from previous years in that we're not going to have pictures for particular elements of the roadmap. I've changed it to essentially having built consensus and moving into just road mapping. So first of all, I wanted to provide some sort of basic consensus, some basic context based on what I've been hearing from people over the last couple of PIs, really, 2 or 3 PIs. So first, wanted to talk about the Mojaloop family, and we all tend to assume that means the hub, the Mojaloop hub, and that is by far the biggest part of it. But it's become clear that we have a whole bunch of things that we deploy or would deploy as part of a hub deployment, but are actually potentially of value even beyond that huge context. So, for example, it's become quite apparent that the Oracle and the associated ALS it's extremely important for the operation of a Mojaloop hub, but it's something that could be used by others as well. And certainly in the DPG context, it's an area of functionality that we can add to make available to the DPG community to enable them to tell us where to route payments, for example. And there is also potential extensions around peering of oracles. So it becomes more and more like a DNS service, particularly when we move into international transactions. And then there's Payment Manager, which is not the only way of connecting into a hub, quite clearly, but it's an extremely valuable way. It's an open source project. It's part of the Mojaloop family. But in itself, it has additional value as well. It could be deployed elsewhere. We also have a library, we're building a library of core connectors. And okay, they're only templates, they're not finalized, but extremely useful to enable people to connect in DFSPs. And separately, there's the Mojaloop connector, which itself obviously creates the connection or eases the connection between Payment Manager and the Mojaloop hub. But why can't we have a Vocalink connector, a CMA connector? That they would be potentially extending the value of Payment Manager even further, and maybe even spreading the Mojaloop family, the Mojaloop reputation. And maybe people who wouldn't previously look at Mojaloop would then consider, okay, they're playing nicely in the wider community. Maybe that's worth looking at. There's obviously PISP, which I think is an extremely important development. The approach we have to 3PPI, PISP is probably one of the most important things that we're going to see within deployments over the next 6 months, a year, 2 years. And then there's merchant payments, which is another layer or another function adjacent to a Mojaloop hub. I mean, we're doing a lot of work in that space, and there's always the assumption that it's connected into the Mojaloop hub, and it certainly relies on interactivity with the Oracle. But it could use the Oracle and potentially a different payment service. So that's additional value that we are bringing to the broader community. And there's merchant registry function, and that's linking into services such as Greg's FRMS and national registration services, and driving merchant payments and potentially the Oracle as well. So there's a huge amount of work that we are doing that is extending the functionality of a Mojaloop hub that could be useful elsewhere and would spread the word about Mojaloop. And I think we should bear that in mind, particularly during the process today. Moving back to the main purpose of what we're doing today, we're focused on the road mapping for Mojaloop. Why? Well, because it's useful to just provide a map of where we are and where we think we're going. That doesn't mean that we are trying to constrain what you, the community, do. We're not trying to tell you what to do. Members of the community are obviously free to do what they want, and more importantly, where they see a gap or where they see something that they really need to focus on, we would certainly encourage that. But that's in the context of a broader product-led roadmap of things that we see need to be done, and this is based on discussions within the community, with potential adopters, with hub operators, and with essentially anyone else we talk to, regulators as well. It's important that a product-led roadmap doesn't just focus on what hub operators say they need right now. For example, just to pick one example, it's important that instead we take a longer term view, because with the best will in the world, a hub operator tends to be focused on now, the next quarter, the next 6 months, maybe the next year. But we need to take a longer term look than that and think about things that we as a community need. Today is, as it says here, a one-off baselining process, trying to create the first draft of a roadmap, which I will seek to refine over the coming days and weeks, adding more detail to the various elements of it. So we're not going to try and get right down to all of the detail today. This is just providing a jumping off point for the coming weeks. So we're going to try to define work streams from the road mapping outputs, which will allow us to dive down into more detail. And those work streams will be defined not from individual pieces on the roadmap, but around related and interdependent activities to ensure that we have coherence around this approach. We'll also be looking at establishing fortnightly product council workshops, focusing on one work stream per workshop, trying to drive progress reasonably efficiently. And we'll see how that works, and we'll try and review progress and potentially replan at future community meetings. Still getting my head around the idea of calling them community meetings rather than convenings, but I'm getting there. So, how do we go about this? Okay, I feel pretty sure that you've got the idea that we're talking about pillars a lot. So this process is going to be focused around those pillars. For each pillar, we're going to identify the key initiatives, work streams, tasks, the things that must be done. Try to identify the interdependencies between them, and not specifically size the task, but get a feel for, is it a small, medium, large task? And then we will review with the community today. We'll look for omissions. And once we've done that, once we have a list of tasks, I'm going to ask people to speak for a task, not as we have in the past, try to justify it or appeal for support, because it's on the roadmap. A task has been identified, it's on the roadmap. Instead, I want the people that we call to talk about the dependencies, when it might be ready to start, the size of the task. Is it small, medium, large? Is it going to take 1 PI, 3 PIs, 4 or 5 PIs, whatever? And then at the end of the process of that discussion, that process today, we're going to spend some time collaboratively placing all the tasks on a timeline, actually on multiple timelines. We're going to have a timeline per pillar, because otherwise it's just going to get too complex. And then after this session, we would have far too much time. I would spend the time just trying to bring them all together and introduce a single timeline across all tasks with interdependencies highlighted. So these are the pillars. You've also heard them described multiple times. I don't need to go through them again, but just to briefly say, it's about making adoption easier, which means getting more deployments, achieving scale, making deployments profitable, connecting to other systems, accepting that Mojaloop may not be the only switch in the world and we need to interconnect with others. So that's briefly the description. But underlying all of these is a common support for the pillars, which is the delivery and maintenance of a quality product, that being the hub. Without the hub, without it being maintained, without it being enhanced as we see requirements, then the three pillars will just come crashing to the floor anyway. So that's enough with the tortured analogies. So just to focus briefly on that quality product, because we're not going to spend too much time on this today, because it is something that I just see as something which is happening, which will happen, which we're all aware of, and we don't need to spend too much time in this product session today. So there are continuous processes around ongoing maintenance, and as Tom has talked about this week, adopting Mojaloop for testing and various other functions. And also, I think it's important to note that in order to achieve the scale that we want, Pillar 2 is all about scale. We need potentially to be looking to vNext for that. So we need to continue the development of vNext, and we need to work towards a migration towards that. And of course, obviously, as part of that, adoption of Tiger Beetle within vNext in order to get to the kind of tens of thousands of transactions that we want to. Now, first of all, the first pillar 1. I put in here in brackets, promote a better understanding of Mojaloop, and that's really a reminder to me, because it's not really a product issue. But it came as a shock to me that over this last PI, when I've been talking to people who are not in the Mojaloop community, how few of them actually have any clue what Mojaloop is. They hear us talking in technicalities about Mojaloop, about its function as a switch, and they hear us making statements about interoperable payments. But when it comes to actually understanding why they need a Mojaloop, there's very few people out there who really get it. So you'll see people talking about MIFOS, for example. All we need is to connect to MIFOS and we'll have interoperable payments. And I don't know where they think the magic fairy dust is coming from, but MIFOS aren't going to do it on their own. Sorry. And we need some, if we're going to get more deployments, we need to spend some time trying to address that message and getting the message out about why Mojaloop, what Mojaloop actually does, and why they need Mojaloop. Separately, earlier this week, we talked about an adoption toolkit, and that really is about trying to facilitate new deployments. The adoption toolkit is essentially a handbook for potential hub owners, service owners, hub operators, whoever it may be, to try and help them to get from the idea of, oh, I think a Mojaloop deployment might be good here, through to going live. And it talks about, yes, it will need to talk about technicalities, but it needs to talk about business, it needs to talk about regulation, it needs to talk about scheme rules, all of this stuff. And we need that because, well, Steve and I often talk to people who think they would like a Mojaloop hub, but they really have no idea on how to get to that point. So that's high on the priority list for Pillar 1. We need better portals for both the hub and payment manager. We know that there's work been going on with LitzaWorks. The BizOps framework is probably the way forward on this, certainly for the hub. We need extensions to the BizOps framework. We need more We need more sample portals, and we need to help people to understand how they develop new portals. And one of the ideas that's been kicked around is the idea of a boot camp actually focused on building new portals. Easier deployment. We need to make IAC more accessible. David and Oscar have made huge strides with IAC, and it's made deployment far more efficient and straightforward for them. I don't think there are many people other than Oscar and David who really understand IAC and how to shape a configuration. So we need to find a way of making IAC more accessible. We need easier deployment for on-prem, and we had a good session on that yesterday. So what work do we need to do to facilitate that? And of course, there's Azure, which we talked about yesterday. Again, huge strides forward. And what do we need to do for phase 2 of that? We need a better showcase. When somebody's thinking about Mojaloop, how do we show them what Mojaloop could do, what it might look like, make it tangible for them, something they can touch effectively. The idea of saying, yes, you need Mojaloop, now give me however much money and I'll run it up for you, is not a great sales tool. We need something which allows them to just run it up quickly and see what it might look like. And that probably includes portals using the BizOps framework. Then the obvious route towards doing that is Miniloop, because no demos actually need any security or reliability. So that might be a route forward, and maybe we can do some work on that. We also need a fintech sandbox. We need fintech to be able to come along and just try things, and the sandbox is the obvious route to that. And I've put in Pillar 1 integration with FRMS and demonstrate it with a live deployment. And the reason that's in Pillar 1 is because when a regulator, for example, sees a potential deployment, one of the things they want to know is what you're going to do about fraud, how you're going to manage it. So it makes it easier for a potential deployment to go ahead if we can say, yeah, we've got an integrated fraud management system. So those are the things I have put together for Pillar 1. Adoption toolkits, portals, potentially a portal bootcamp, easier deployment, making IAC more accessible, support for on-prem, Azure, better showcases, Miniloop, a fintech sandbox, and integration with FRMS. Can I now open it to the room and somebody tell me what I'm missing in Pillar 1? Bearing in mind, this is about making adoption easier. Does anyone have any comment? Is there anything else that I'm missing that would make it more likely that we would get a deployment, or that adoption would be easier?
Okay, Paul, there are 2 comments. So.
Yeah. Hi, Paul. This is Amit. I have a question. Could you unpack fintech sandbox a little bit more?
It's a Mojaloop deployment in a managed environment that supports, for example, PISP, and that maybe has a few simulated DFSPs connected to it, where a fintech can come along and integrate with it through the PISP or 3PPI interface, and develop potential services, use it to support the development of their app, their service, and use it as a showcase. So essentially, it's about helping fintechs understand the potential of Mojaloop in a pseudo real world environment.
Hi, Paul. This is Sajib. I have a question on the first item, which leads on to the adoption toolkit. One of the ways to promote better understanding is, or tends to be, comparing and contrasting. So is there anything that the foundation will prepare which compares and contrasts proprietary versus open source, and the challenges and also the strengths?
So, Jeeb, I think we have quite a lot about proprietary versus open source, but that assumes you have to get to a certain point in order to ask that question. You have to understand that what Mojaloop is and what the comparator services are. So I think we do reasonably well on that when you have somebody coming along who's reasonably knowledgeable. The problem I have is getting people to that point where they can ask that question. If you see what I mean, it's the precursor to that. It's I want to deploy this kind of service, and I'm integrating. I have a MoSIP deployment. I have a MeFOS deployment. Why do I need anything else? Type of thing. But it's making people understand they need the glue that holds everything together, and Mojaloop is that glue, which provides the utility at the bottom to glue everything together. And I often come across a situation where people don't understand that there is even the need for that glue. Sajid, does that answer your question?
It does. There's a comment from Julie.
Hi, Paul, this is Julie. One question. So I feel like there is almost a timelines underneath pillar one, because if you think of like, a traditional adoption cycle, right? First step is understand what is a platform. So for me, it comes with better showcase and perhaps like, within Mojaloop, it's demonstrating a few key scenarios. But when you meet someone for the first time, like they're not going to tell you every single detail about themselves, right? They're just going to share key characteristics that will allow you to understand, oh, should we meet again or no? So I think for me, like, making better showcase should almost be first in this slide. And then the second step is indeed, how do we deploy the product, understand it a bit better? And also like, what does that mean? Oh, sorry, I keep saying product. I shouldn't say product, but platform. Apologies for this. When we deploy the product, what does that mean in terms of processes as well, or at least the processes that the person using it needs to think through? And I think this is also perhaps something we need to think of.
Isn't that the adoption toolkit? The role of the adoption toolkit. It's all about stimulating what you need to consider, your considerations and the order in which you have to do them. It's almost like whereas today we're looking at road mapping the product itself. The adoption toolkit is a roadmap from idea to live.
Yeah, indeed. But I think like, when what I've seen in the past when it comes to implementing payment platform, right, is you think of the technicalities a lot, but not necessarily of the rest, right? And actually,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree. So in my head, the adoption toolkit is things like at what point do I need to talk to the regulator? What do I need to talk to them about? How frequently do I need to talk to the regulator? You need to build a group of partners. What type of partners do I need, and what are their roles in this partnership? How do I develop my scheme rules? The technicality of it, the technical element, is just one part of the adoption toolkit, and possibly not even the major part, to be honest. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Any
you.
other comments?
I see a lot of interest in what Julie just said, and I just think I've written it down, Paul, and I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
people who want to contribute to the toolkit because I think she's started a lot of ideas, but Paul has a lot of other things to go on. So if anyone has thoughts about what Julie just said, please talk to me later and we'll bring it into the toolkit. But let's let Paul
Yeah.
continue to other.
Well,
areas.
we will definitely, when this adoption toolkit isn't going to be developed by me. I'll be one of the contributors, but we're looking for people who want to contribute to that toolkit. How do I get from day one where I think, hey, I need a Mojaloop deployment to going live? What are all the things I need to think about? Now, I've been through it. Steve's been through it. Warren's been through it. Jane's been through it. We need all these people to contribute their experience. And Julia, I would agree. You should be contributing to this. This is a distillation of the experience of the people in this room, the community, so that people who are coming along behind can have the process eased as much as possible. There's no they don't fall to one of the gotchas, you know, oh, I forgot to talk to this person 3 months ago, so I can't go live, type of thing. And we've all been through live deployments of different services, including Mojaloop, quite a few times between us. So there's a lot of knowledge to be distilled there. And that's what the adoption toolkit is about.
Paul, there's one more comment here from Malcolm.
Hello, morning everyone. Malcolm Castero from Uganda. Mine is more on the first bullet point, promoting a better understanding of Mojaloop. I believe that one, you have to define exactly what Mojaloop is, because like you said, most people are confusing it for MIFOS. So they need to be a simple understanding of what Mojaloop is. You know, something very shiny, if I may say, to attract attention. And also two, probably if you mention who the targeted audience, the clients, the consumers are. Are you looking at government? Are you looking at MDIs? Who are you looking at in terms of Mojaloop? Are you looking at normal, probably payment aggregators? So the more you put, the merrier, I believe. Then also the user case, they should also come out well. Like it can be able to do bulk payments, be able to, you know, switch money transfers and all that. So that at least someone has an idea what it is, who it's serving, and what's the purpose. That can also help in breaking down the barrier.
Yeah, and we need to have that message in terms of product, in terms of business, not in terms of technicalities. We have a tendency, all of us do, we have a tendency to dive down into the technicalities. And if you're talking to a regulator or a hub operator, you can see their eyes glaze over straight away. It has to be focused on business and product, I think. Are there any other? Okay.
Wait, there's one final one from Tom.
Tom.
As a comment, actually two comments. First one is, I think I've been schooled up on the fact that we could look at smaller businesses and enabling smaller businesses, not just government level and whole of government or whole of East Africa, whatever. And because I've been speaking to a few people who are just doing it, and they're doing it sometimes without our help. That's the first thing. That's just a comment. The second thing, I raised this in Arusha, and I think, Paul, you're giving me another great time. You're actually prompting me that I think it's, and with what Jason from Microsoft showed us, and with the contribution Microsoft is actually making to our community, they've spent a lot of money and time putting this on Azure and on managed services. And I'd like to do, in fact, I think I will plan to do a TCO analysis of managed services versus doing everything in VMs, because it came to my attention this morning over breakfast that it was lost yesterday from Jason that the Azure Edge is from Microsoft to solve the data sovereignty problems.
Yeah, it is.
Yet still give you a cloud and to move CapEx to OpEx. And I think as part of enabling the deployments and enabling, we can lower costs for people and therefore extend their runways. I think that should be somewhere either under IAC or with Miniloop, but in conjunction with Microsoft to start with, and then as a whole holistic view. So I just think the managed services, and this relates to the, sorry, I'll get off the soapbox in a minute, but this relates to the first question of where are we using proprietary? Where is it smart to use proprietary? Where is it low cost? Where is it enabling? And those proprietary, be it AWS, be it our supporter Azure, right? Where is it smart for our users and our deployers, and where can they? I just think we should put that under our showcase, under our deployment, under our adoption headings for that TCO.
And that's something that we absolutely should discuss in meetings, you know, the product council meetings over the next couple of months. Completely agree.
And just to make a note, managed service versus ownership, that is a whole chapter in the adoption toolkit. You have now been nominated to write that chapter.
All right, Paul, I'll let you go on.
Just to say on that, yeah, Tom, you hinted at, but didn't explicitly say, and it comes under promoting a better understanding of Mojaloop. Mojaloop isn't, we all know, but we don't necessarily explicitly say, Mojaloop isn't necessarily about a national switch. It could be a sub-national switch. It, you know, I mean, WinePay is a clear example. It's focused on the MFI mobile wallet sector, for example. It's not a national switch, and we need to make sure that part of that better understanding is, we're not necessarily requiring you to deploy as a national switch. Before we move on, there's a question on the
from Michael.
Hang on, Michael, can you just hold on a second? Sandy, so you've had your hand up for a while. Okay, thank you.
All right, Greg, I see Greg's hand up as well.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
we can hear you.
Okay. I don't know if Mark's still in the room or not, but you know, for Microsoft. But something that work that needs to be done as far as implementing Stack and for the data governance and all that is, how do we get to a lower, you know, cost basis? Because the costs aren't necessarily in what Microsoft is doing. The costs are also in what the local provider of the Stack is doing. So Liquid is the partner. We all know how cloud works. If they've got all their calculations for how much do they charge for electricity for this much in rack and everything else. We need to figure out how to lower that cost basis, right? It's good, don't get me wrong, it's probably good for a national switch, right? But I think it needs to be better. It was kind of the outcome of what we were doing on the analysis was, you know, this is good, but it's still a little high. So there needs to be some sort of study that can, how we can lower the costs, whether that's, you know, government grants, whether it's, you know, from the electricity company, whatever, because there are additional costs other than just Azure that are involved in standing that up, right? There's the hardware, there's this rack space, there's all those types of things. So I really think that needs some focus for how do we drive the cost of that package down. And I know Microsoft's very interested in getting to a quality price point for that. In fact, their Africa strategy, I don't know they even intend to make money right now. Right. So we need to take advantage of that while we can.
Okay, good. We need to bring that into the discussion. Absolutely. Thank you, Greg.
Michael.
Thanks. When I look down this list, it's all technical things. Now, I think anybody who's been involved with the actual deployment and adoption of one of these things will know that the real problems are not technical problems. They're regulatory problems, they're problems about getting participants on board. Those are the things that take the time, that take the effort. And one of our selling points, I think, for Mojaloop is that Mojaloop is special and that you will get something different. But another way, I think, in which we can ease the adoption process for Mojaloop in general is to make it the whole non-technical process of adoption easier for people who are thinking of going for Mojaloop than it would be if they were thinking, for instance, of going for proprietary systems where the non-technical aspects are going to be exactly the same, probably, slightly different. But if we can be better at this than other people, and people can see and know that, then I think that's going to make adoption much easier for people.
Yeah. And that's the purpose of the adoption toolkit. It's to bring together all that distilled knowledge of all the non-technical stuff. And so there'll be some technical stuff in the adoption toolkit, but the majority of it is not. It's about when you need to talk to regulators, what about, what's the schedule, how do you define scheme rules, what governance model do you want, how does that affect the scheme rules depending on the particular governance model you've chosen, how do you build a set of a partnership, what types of partners do you need in your partnership, what roles do they carry out, etc., etc., etc. So it's all of that stuff. Adoption toolkit is definitely a bucket for all of that non-technical stuff that we distilled experience from the people in the room, essentially, in how to get to deployment. Shall I move on to the next pillar?
Yes, go ahead, Paul.